Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I see a couple of people starting to populate our room here. Hello, hello. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box and put the program that you're from, that would be wonderful. I see we have some call-in people, so you will not be able to do that, and that's okay. We will get started promptly at noon, but I just wanted to take some moment to make sure people get into the platform okay. Seeing a lot of familiar names. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Stephanie, I see you raised your hand. I'm not sure if you touched that by accident, but if you have a question, if you don't mind, just either shooting it to me in the chat box. That'd be wonderful. Hi to people who are just joining us. We're having everyone introduce themselves and put the program that they're with in the chat box. We will get started promptly at noon. Oh, it's noon. That happened quickly. So hi, now good afternoon. My name is Gina Davis. I am the Professional Learning Coordinator with Team Labor. I am going to launch a poll here real quick so we can get a quick snapshot of what is the role of everyone in the room. If you can go ahead and answer the question for me that you see on your screen. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds here. Okay. So it looks like we have a really great variety joining us here today, Doug. So we got some program administrators, MIS, other leadership, ESL, ABE, so quite the variety. So that's wonderful.
Great.
Yeah, so today's session is going to be Understanding Adult Ed Data for Instructors. I have my esteemed colleague, Doug Weimer, who's going to be leading us through today's conversation. And I look forward to joining with you all. So thank you for joining us today.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So as Gina said, this is a session on understanding adult education data for instructors. I'm very happy to be part of the Maryland Virtual Training Institute today. Very briefly, if you have not met me before, I am an adult education program specialist at the Department of Labor. Briefly, my history, I used to be in a local program. I was an ESL adjunct for 3 years, an ESL coordinator, as well as a program director for 2 years. And I also was on the MACE board and was MACE board president for a brief time. So today's session today is going to be an overview of the structure of adult education in the United States. Basically, I want to talk a little bit about the funding because that's always tied in closely with the data, as well as do a little bit about adult education terminology, and also go over what you as an instructor, if you're an instructor, can do with the data and why it's important for you to understand a lot about adult education data. So first of all, adult education, where does the money come from for what we do? At a national level, Congress is the one that authorized the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which we normally just abbreviate as WIOA. That then goes through to the U.S. Department of Education through the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. We always abbreviate that as OCTAE. So if you ever hear anyone talk about OCTAE, they're talking about the Department of Education, and in other words, the federal level. They're the ones that have the oversight of administering adult education programs in the United States. From there, it gets passed down to the 57 states and territories throughout the United States that provide adult education. So to review that, Congress authorized RIOA, which authorizes the Department of Education through OCTAE to then have oversight over all of the state programs that run adult education throughout the United States, which of course means we're talking about money. So the money comes from the federal government and it gets passed to the local states to administer their programs. In Maryland, that money comes to Maryland, and then of course Maryland adds additional funding to this federal funding picture. So adult education is federal funding, comes down to the states. Maryland will add its own funding through the Maryland Department of Labor, which is the office that Gina and I work through. Our office then distributes and monitors adult education funds to our current 25 local grantees, which are community colleges, community-based organizations, and the library system, and we also have the County Board of Educations. So if we're talking about money, we're talking about money from the federal government being added to Maryland's money. Labor distributes that through a competitive grant process to the local programs, and then local programs also match those funds as well. So money comes from the feds through the state to the local. Data, of course, goes in the opposite direction. So you as an instructor are feeding into the data system that feeds all the way up to the federal government. So the local program reports out information as a program that then comes to us at the state. We then compile that data and the outcomes, and that gets reported up to the federal level. The reason why I bring that up is because I want you to understand that, to be very crass about it, data is money, and that's how we get our money for our programs. Because if our data is poor, funding may not continue. If our data is great, funding may continue. Congress needs to, of course, see that the money that they're investing through the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act into adult education is being used correctly, and it is having outcomes that they want to see. So that's how the money and the data are connected. Okay, let's go through a little bit of adult education terminology. I could spend hours going through terminology. I'm just going to touch upon those things that I think are the most important for adult education instructors to understand. So first of all, the term reportable student. I like to describe this using what I call the gym principle. So it's almost the end of the year. People make lots of New Year's resolutions. They're going to join a fitness club. They're going to go. They're going to lose weight. They're going to get in shape. You have a best of intentions, but sometimes that doesn't pan out. Adult education sometimes is like that, but usually the reason why it doesn't pan out is because life gets in the way of our students. Our students are adults. They're working. They have children. Things happen, and they may drop out of our program. Luckily, OCTAE at the federal level understands that this is an issue across the country. So we have what's called a reportable student or a retained student. This is any student in our programs that have a valid pretest and has 12 hours of attendance. Students that don't have that 12 hours of attendance during a whole fiscal year do not count for or against their program, which means that if you have a student in your class that is a no-show or has less than 12 hours of attendance, if that's all that that student has the entire fiscal year, then that student actually won't count against your program. The opposite of that, if once a student does have 12 hours of instruction, then the program is on the hook for that student, meaning that once they hit that 12 hours of instruction, they're going to count whether they make a gain in your program or not. And that's an important thing for instructors to know. We want all of our students to continue with our programs. They come 6 hours and drop out. We still want them to come back. But you understand data-wise, 12 hours is that mark where once they hit that, then they are going to be counted as part of our reported students. The next term I want to go over is post-test rate. The post-test rate is the number of students that are post-tested divided by the number of reportable students. So if you have a program with 100 reportable students, so 100 have 12 hours or more, and 56 of those students post-test, 56 out of 100 is a 56% post-test rate. Once again, this is for the whole fiscal year. I see that someone asked in the chat window, what is the fiscal year? The fiscal year is the state fiscal year, which starts from July 1st and ends in June 30th. So you can also think of it kind of as an academic year for most programs as well. So once again, the fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th. Programs are expected to achieve a 70% post-test rate. That's a really high bar. And if you ask the staff at your program if you're achieving it, you may or may not get a positive answer from that. But that is the expectation, that programs will achieve a 70% post-test rate throughout the entire fiscal year. Meaning if a student comes in the program, they have 12 hours or more, it's expected that 70% of those students will post-test at least once during the fiscal year. The next term I want to go over is a measurable skill gain, which we always abbreviate as MSG. There are two ways for a student to get a measurable skill gain in the program in Maryland. The first way, and the most common way, is for a student to make an educational functioning level gain. That means from pre-test to post-test, the student has gone up a level, whether it's a level on your CASAS test, a level on your TABE test. If they're going up a level from, say, ABE level 3 to ABE level 4 in the post-test, that is an EFL gain. It's the same thing for ESL as well. If they go from ESL level 1 to level 2, that's an educational functioning level gain. The other way that a student can get an MSG is through the secondary school diploma. That means that you're passing all parts of the GED test, or you're completing the National External Diploma Program. Both of these measurable skill gain do have the same weight when it comes to counting as an MSG. So if a student gets an educational functioning level gain, that means the same as them getting a high school diploma as far as this particular outcome is concerned. If a student gets both of those, that's great. It still only counts as one gain, unfortunately. We don't get to double dip on student outcomes, unfortunately. If you're wondering what the MSG goals are for Maryland, for this fiscal year, the expectation is that 40% of adult basic ed students will make an MSG gain within the year. 45% of ESL students will make a gain for the fiscal year, and overall 43% of all students will make a gain in the fiscal year. Individual programs may have different goals set for different levels, but I don't have time to go through every single program today, so I just want you to know what the state goals are. This is part of a negotiation process between the state of Maryland and the federal government. Now, what does this have to do with you as an instructor? Well, first of all, you have to understand what metrics are important. You measure a lot of things in your class. Because you are an instructor, you're measuring whether students understand how to multiply fractions. You have to understand whether students can use simple past tense, for example. But from a state and federal level, the metrics that are important are the measurable skill gain, which once again is the educational functioning level gain or a high school diploma. Enrollment numbers are important, but remember, this is the number of students that are reportable. So the number of students that have a pre-test and have 12 hours of instruction. The post-test rate is another important metric that helps us determine how well we're retaining students to post-testing. And then also transitioning students to post-secondary education and training is another key metric. And that means that once the students are completing your program, are they going on to either 2 or 4 year college, or are they going on to a job training program? That can be outside of the program, or it could be part of an integrated education and training program. There are lots of other metrics. Are students getting jobs? Are students gaining wages, etc.? Some of that are things that you're not going to capture in your class, or you may not see that you have a direct impact on. These are the ones that are important for you to know. Now, what can I do to improve outcomes? The first big thing is attendance. Now, I'm sure that your local programs harp on this when it comes to talking about attendance, but I want you to understand why it's so important. You have to maintain accurate daily attendance. Now, that may be a daily sign-in sheet at your program. It may be an electronic attendance. There are different versions of that, but it's really important that that is accurate and timely. Because, one, are your students going to be reportable or not? If you have a 3-hour class and you are marking down the student is there for the full 3 hours, but in reality they're only there for 1 hour, you may artificially inflate the student's hours, and maybe they wouldn't have been a reportable student had you been accurately recording their hours. But if you record too many hours, they become reportable and then they drop out of the program. That's going to affect your outcomes. On the reverse side, we also want to know, are the students really ready for post-testing? If you're marking down that your students are there every day, 3 hours a day, but in reality they're leaving every day at the break, they're only there half of the time. So you may have that the student has, say, 42 hours of instruction. Okay, they're ready for post-testing. but in reality, maybe they only have half as many hours and they might not really be ready to post-test. You're the instructor, so you know that better than anyone else. And then also, are students missing out on post-testing? If your attendance isn't accurate, the staff that are coming into your classes or pulling students out to post-test, if they don't see what the hours are accurately, they may be missing out on students that could post-test. And then, are students meeting your program's attendance policy? Every program has a different attendance policy, but it's important that you know what that is, and also how it affects your class. You may have a waiting list for your class. If the attendance policy locally is that after a student misses 2 classes, they're removed from class and another student can take that class, it's important for you to know that and also make sure that you're marking the attendance correctly so that that other student can take that place if necessary. So what can you do to improve outcomes when it comes to the hours? Well, first of all, I want you to realize that student hours are a continuum throughout the fiscal year. For example, if a student's in your class in the fall and they only get 25 hours and can't post-test, as an instructor, you're probably disappointed. But keep in mind that if you keep that student engaged, even though they've only come 25 hours, that student can still post-test, but it might be in the next session. In the spring, maybe they take class at a different location, a different time, etc. So they're with a different instructor. But if they persist, let's say they get 30 hours in the next session, they now have 55 hours of instruction. That student can now post-test. And while you didn't see that in your class, the program did see that. And the program is going to again get an increase in their post-test rate. That's going to be important for our metrics. And even though you didn't see it in your class, part of that, what made that happen is because you got that student to 25 hours of instruction. So keep that in mind. You may not see the post-test in your class, but it's still your responsibility to try to keep that student engaged because they may post-test in the next session. Similarly, the measurable skills gains work the same way. Student outcomes are on the same continuum. If a student enrolls in your class in the fall, gets 50 hours of instruction, but doesn't make a gain, yeah, you're going to be disappointed. But keep in mind that the studies show that it usually takes between 100 and 150 hours of instruction for a student to make a gain. Our classes aren't that long for many, many reasons. So we have shorter classes, 60 hours, 72 hours, 40 hours, 50 hours, etc. The student may not make a gain the first time in your class. Now, that's not necessarily a failure because the student stuck with you, they've made progress, they come back in the spring, maybe with you, maybe with a different instructor, they test again, they make that EFL gain. Even though you didn't see that gain in your class, the program did. So that's another important thing to know is that even though the student may not make the gain in your class, you help them stay in the class. You want to make sure that you're motivating them. They continue with the program. They may make the gain in the next session. And if that's within the same fiscal year, that still counts as an outcome for the program. The other big thing you can do is communication. Pass along important information about your students. If your student's going on some kind of medical leave, if your student has been incarcerated and their friends or their family members tell you that, the student's leaving the country. I put death on there and it may seem silly, but of course, if your student passes away, this is all important information that you need to share with the leadership of your program. That could be done different ways. It may be an email, maybe talking with someone in the office, etc. But it's important to share that information. One of the reasons why that's so important is because some of these are allowable excuses to be removed from MSG consideration. So for example, if you have a student that's with you for so many hours, they're reportable now, but all of a sudden they drop out. Okay, you're thinking, well, this student's not going to make a gain. It's going to look bad. But if you found out that that student is entering a long-term care facility, a student is incarcerated, if you report that to your leadership, that student can be excused from counting against the program. Now, not every reason is excusable, but there are some excusable reasons that they can be excluded from counting against the program. So it's important that you communicate that information. Pass along student success stories. Did your student complete a college application? That's a measure of the student getting ready to transition to post-secondary education or training. Did the student get a job? Is the student interested in career training? Maybe there's someone in your program they can speak to then make that jump to a career training program. That's all important information that you need to communicate. I want to stop here for a second and look at the chat. It says, so why do we expect a student to make a gain in post-test after 40 hours if research shows they won't make it until later? So we have a balance we have to maintain. The CASAS and TABE allow us to post-test a student at 40 hours at the earliest. So we have to maintain a balance between how much instruction a student needs to make a gain versus how long is a student going to persist in a program. So we could run classes that are 150 hours long, but if a student gets tired of the class and drops out at 80 hours, we've missed an opportunity to post-test that student, and that student may have made a gain. So that's why there is kind of this struggle between post-testing the student immediately at 40 hours or giving the student more instruction to get them ready, but also risking the student may drop out of the program. And of course, remember, sometimes students drop out not because they want to, but because something's happened. They move, childcare issues, or job schedule changes. So that's why there's always that struggle between 40 hours, the earliest you can test, or waiting until later whenever they may do a better job on the post-test. Suppose a student is sick for 1 week but doesn't visit a doctor until the second week. What then? First week doesn't qualify, lose students. Well, part of that depends on your program's attendance policy. So that's really important to understand that the attendance policy is a local decision. Had a student miss 4 classes but wanted to complete class, didn't qualify to continue. That's also a local decision, and that's a balance you have to strike between having students that want to get into your class, but also having the expectation that students have enrolled for a class. It is federally and state funded, and we're asking the students to take that class seriously and continue. So that's always a struggle, but very good points.
Doug, we have one more question,
Sure.
just a couple up. It looks like the feds need a 70% metric while the state uses 45%. Does this mean that funds flow from the state at 45, but not the feds unless the rate reaches 70?
Okay, so the 70% is not the measurable skills gain metric. That's the metric for post-testing. The 45%, that is the metric for getting measurable skills gain. So those two things are different. The 70% is the post-test rate we're looking for. The 40-some%, that's the measurable skills gain. So just because a student post-test doesn't mean they're going to make a gain. What is the best way to report student success stories? That's kind of up to your program and what your relationship is with your leadership. I would say an email at the very least, but of course you probably have your supervisor's phone number, call them up. If you have social media that your program allows you to share things with, that's another possibility, but that's a discussion you really need to have with your local program. And yes, the 70% can be achieved over several classes. Another point I want to make for how you can really affect change is ask for your data. Data is entered into the program by the MIS, which is the Management Information System Specialist, into LACES, which is our database. And the LACES outcomes are tabulated into different tables for reporting to us at the state and also for reporting to the federal government. Do you get the opportunity to review how your class is doing? Your class by itself, you can do that because usually you have the student information, but how is your level doing? If you teach AB level 3, how is AB level 3 doing on the whole? Because even though you may not see a gain in your class, once that student has completed several classes in that fiscal year, maybe they've made a gain. So something you could say is, hey, how does AB level 3 work across the program for the whole year? And then how does it look versus the state goals? I'm saying for you to ask this. The caveat is, don't beat down your administrators to get this information. Please understand that there's always a delay getting that data into the system. And of course, they have to prepare that information for you. If they just printed out the federal reports for you, you may have difficulty deciphering what that information is because there's a lot of info on it. But I would encourage you to start asking, if you don't get that information already, how is my class doing compared to the program average? How is my class doing compared to what we're looking at for the state? As an instructor, I don't want you to think that the post-testing is the only thing that's important, but you also have to understand that Congress is really looking at numbers. They unfortunately don't get to see the story of each and every one of your students. So you want to make sure those numbers are really reflecting the effort of what you're putting into your classroom. I'm not going to go over that. So that was a very, very brief introduction to data for adult education. If there's an opportunity at another date for me to go into more detail, I could share a lot more information with you. I have also started visiting some programs and doing training sessions for instructors. It's something I just started doing, and of course, it's a lot longer presentation. We could sit down and actually look at your program's data one-on-one. If that's something you're interested in, I would say talk to your administrators. It's a training that I could do, and it's also a training that your local programs can do as well. At this point, I do want to do a review of what we've learned so far. So if you have your cell phone out, I'd like you to go ahead and go to this website, Kahoot.it. It's Kahoot.it. You can use an iPhone, you can use an Android device. Just open up your phone and go to the web browser, whether it's Google Chrome or it's Safari on an iPhone. You can do it from any cell phone that has a web browser on it. You do not need to download the Kahoot app. I just want to do this quickly to review to see what you learn. And also, this is something you could potentially use in your classroom. So while you do that, I'm going to go to my Kahoot.
Don't forget to share your Kahoot screen, Doug.
Yep, give me just a second. Okay, we should be there now. So once you go to Kahoot.it, it's going to ask you for a game pin. Please type the pin number that's on the screen right now. All right, you guys are getting in. Good. Got 12 people. Good. Looks like many of you have used this before. That's good. Kahoot is a free service you can use. There's some limitations to the free version, but what we're using today is the free version. So don't feel like you have to pay for this service. It's something you want to use in class. I'm going to give just a few more seconds to see if anyone else joins in. Once again, it's Kahoot.it. The PIN number is 466-2368. Okay, we have 18 players, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. What's going to happen if you haven't used this before is the question is going to show up on the screen that you're looking at, and then the answer choices will be up there as well, and then you just touch the color that corresponds to it on your phone. So let's go ahead and get started. Question 1. A reportable student is one that has a pretest and how many hours of instruction? Okay, in 10 seconds, we had 11 of you guess correctly. A reportable student is a student that has a pretest and 12 hours of instruction. That's the point at which they count 4 against your program. Nikki, first one to come in with correct answer. Good job. True or false? Money for adult education only comes from the federal government. All right, almost all of you got that right. False. Money for adult ed comes from the federal government. It also comes from the state. And in addition, the local programs also have to match part of the grant. So you're really using 3 different funding lines whenever you were teaching adult ed. What does MSG stand for? Time's up. All right, everyone got that right? Good. I guess you heard me say it over and over again too many times. MSG is a measurable skill gain, which is the most important metric when it comes to the federal government. True or false? There are two ways to get an MSG, an EFL gain or getting a high school diploma. Okay, 12 of you got that right. That is true. Those are the two ways to get a measurable skills gain, either getting an EFL gain from pre to post test or getting a high school diploma through the GED test or NEDP. All right, good job. True or false? The post-test rate is the number of students post-tested divided by all enrolled students. Okay, I got a few of you on this one. The post-test rate is the number of students post-tested divided by all reportable students or all retained students. Students have 12 hours or more, not by all enrolled students. So if you enroll 30 students in your class, but only 15 of them have 12 hours or more, the post-test rate is going to be out of 15. Next question. As an instructor, I can improve outcomes through. All right, through all of the above, making sure you have accurate attendance records is key, communicating student success, and also notifying staff why students leave. Because remember, there are some times where a student may leave for a reason that we can actually have them removed from consideration for outcomes that year. All right, we're almost there. Last question. What's my name? Did anyone get it wrong? All right, very good. Every time I do this, I do get people who get it wrong. So, but all right, so let's see who made it to the podium. Jean, good job. Pamela, excellent. And number one, so dramatic. Stephanie, congratulations for getting them all right and also coming in the quickest. So thank you very much. Congratulations. Your prize is bragging rights. That's all you get.
And
so I want to thank you very much for paying attention. And I don't know if we have any time for questions. I'm more than willing to answer any questions you guys might have.
Yes, thank you so much, Doug. That was wonderful. It really sparked my competitive nature, so I'm always one for that. And Stephanie, congratulations, snaps for you. You're the big winner. I put a feedback form in the chat box, and if you guys can take a second, it really just takes a few moments to give us feedback on how today went. We'd really appreciate that. How do we contact you for further training? Doug's email address is up on the screen right now. But if you do need anything additional, both Doug and myself, all the information on how to contact at least me, I can point you in the right direction, is on our website. All of the recordings, handouts, presentations will be available on the website as soon as I have the ability to do so, including a request for proof of participation. But thank you so much, Doug. This was wonderful. I do love a little Kahoot game. And Stephanie, yeah, I see. Thanks. Great session. So you're the winner. I hope you have a wonderful week and holiday season, and wishing you guys the best. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you.